When FD first began to take off, we were keen to make clear that we are fans just like you. Unlike most football pundits, we don't claim to know better simply because we played the game or have a season ticket, but instead we've tried to make arguments that our viewers can judge for themselves. That meant that we became early adopters of football stats, and while we've often got things wrong over the last few years, we've always tried to back up our opinions with the numbers and show you why we're saying what we're saying. And at the same time, stats have gone mainstream, with most top-flight clubs now employing data in their recruitment process, while the football media have started to include expected goals, key passes and per 90 numbers in their content. But a new conversation has new pitfalls, and while the old football discourse of confidence, determination and desire is outdated and often a substitute for real analysis, stats can be just as empty if you don't know how to use them. So just what do people still get wrong, and which stats are lying to you? When has a team played well? Arsenal boss Mikel Arteta prompted a few raised eyebrows back in December when he complained about his team's luck over the autumn. Last year we won the game against Everton with a 25% chance of winning, you win 3-2. Last weekend it was a 67% chance of winning any Premier League game in history and a 9% chance of losing, and you lose. 3% against Burnley and you lose, 7% against Spurs and you lose. It is something else that needs to go our way, and at the moment it doesn't. This highlights a problem with looking at stats and especially expected goals for individual games. It's often tempting to take expected goals after a match as a kind of scoreboard and suggest that the team with more XG was necessarily the better side and deserved to take all 3 points, as Arteta seems to have been doing here. But there's at least one major factor often left out of that argument, and that's game state. As a general rule, and unsurprisingly, teams which go behind have more possession, attempt more shots, and put up more XG than teams which go ahead, and the longer that team is behind, the more exaggerated that effect will be. So in Arsenal's 2-0 defeat to Spurs earlier this campaign, the Gunners had 70% of the ball, 11 shots to Spurs 5, and edged the XG 0.6 to 0.4. And that could suggest that a draw would be a fair result. After all, Tottenham's goals came from relatively low quality chances, with Son scoring from range and Kane rattling in off the crossbar from a tight angle. But Tottenham went up in the 12th minute, meaning that Arsenal were trailing for almost the entire game, and yet they mustered just 6 shots more than their rivals and almost nothing in expected goals. So while we might say they were unlucky to concede twice, their attacking performance was even worse than it appeared to the eye test. So when Mikel Arteta said the stats suggested Arsenal only had a 7% chance of losing that match, he was misunderstanding what the stats represent. Not the odds of Arsenal losing that particular game where those goals had gone in, but the odds of any team losing a game in which they had 0.6 XG at the end to their opponent's 0.4. And when a team goes 2-0 down and only creates 0.6 XG for the rest of the match, the odds of them losing are very high. By comparison, let's take the Gunners' 3-1 defeat of Chelsea at the Emirates on Boxing Day. This time the Blues actually came out on top by XG 2.3 to 1.9 and had 19 shots to Arsenal's 15. If we applied Arteta's thinking, we'd say that Chelsea did enough to at least draw, with Understat's XG model suggesting Chelsea had a 45% chance of winning and just a 29% chance of losing, based on the shots they created and conceded. But when we dig into the stats, we can see that Chelsea were behind for an entire hour, and that of their 2.3 XG, 1.6 came in the last 7 minutes of the match, when they were already 3-0 down and the Gunners were simply seeing the game out. So while they did create some chances, the match was already lost because of their toothless performance across the first 83 minutes, and they didn't do enough to get back into it. If Arteta wanted to use XG properly, he could have noted that across Arsenal's 5 games between November 29th and December 19th, they created 5.5 XG and allowed 5 XG, but scored just 3 and conceded 8, losing 4 of those matches. That indicates the side genuinely was unlucky and their form was due an uptick, which promptly arrived against the Blues. As a rule, Team XG's use is not so much determining whether a team should have won a particular game, but noting when teams' numbers of goals scored and conceded don't match up with their overall standard of play, and therefore what we can expect from those teams in the future. As always, a combination of stats and the eye test is the way to go. What makes a striker good? Poor use of stats doesn't just apply to teams, but individual players too. And one of the most persistent myths in football is that the very best attackers in the game convert a very high percentage of the chances they get. Strikers are regularly criticised for being streaky or for needing 5 chances to score 1. But this suggests that there are players for whom this is not true, and by and large, that's not really the case. If we take a player generally considered a ruthless finisher, like Cristiano Ronaldo, we might expect to see a high proportion of his shots turn into goals, thanks to his finishing skill with both feet and his head. And of course, he does score a lot. Across the last 5 years, Ronaldo has scored 118 goals in 134 games, or roughly 0.9 goals per game, but in that time he's taken an average of roughly 6 shots a match, meaning that his conversion rate is only around 15%. The advantage conferred by Ronaldo's pace, movement, aerial presence and ambidexterity is not that he scores more of his chances, but that he gets all those chances in the first place. As a general rule, the best forwards are not those with the highest conversion rate, but the ones who take the most shots per game, as you can see when you look at the players attempting the most efforts per 90 across Europe's top 5 leagues: Messi, Insigne, Ronaldo, Lewandowski and Mbappe. In fact, most of the evidence suggests that conversion rate is highly volatile, with almost all players going through patches of good and bad finishing, and this is where XG can come in, giving us an indication of the quality of chance a player is getting and whether their form is likely to pick up or fall off. Back in November, Lionel Messi was yet to score in open play in 2021, taking 40 shots without success, but XG suggested his finishing would come round, and since then he's netted 10 open play goals, the most in Spain. On the other end of the spectrum, there's Mason Greenwood, who scored 10 league goals in 2019-20 from just 3.4 XG. The conversation at the time suggested this was because he's a gifted finisher, focusing on his clean ball striking and two-footedness, but really, his finishing rate was unsustainable, and this year, with the same shots and XG per 90, Greenwood has netted just 1 from 1.7 XG. If he becomes an elite forward, it won't be because he scores more than expected, it'll be because he gets those chances in the first place. Another misleading stat in assessing forwards is the number of touches they get. Tactics writer Michael Cox noted that earlier this season, during Leicester's 3-0 loss to West Ham, it was mentioned that Jamie Vardy had had the fewest touches in the game, 28, and this was seen as evidence that the team was struggling to create danger. But just one game earlier, Vardy was again barely on the ball, registering just 21 touches against Man City, also the fewest on the pitch. On that occasion, he scored a hat-trick. Like clearances for defenders and pass accuracy for midfielders, a striker's touches tend to say more about the style of the team and the kind of player the forward is, rather than their actual quality. In fact, Vardy has averaged around 13 passes completed per 90 over the last 3.5 Premier League seasons, but has still scored 20, 18, 23 and 11 goals in that time. Nobody in the Prem has completed fewer passes than him per 90 this season, including goalkeepers. The second lowest, Patrick Bamford, who has 11 goals. The third lowest, Callum Wilson, who has 10. When teams play on the counter or ask their strikers to make movement off the ball rather than participating in build-up, they will almost always have few touches but plenty of goals. And when they're not scoring, using touches as a stick to beat them with suggests that pundits simply don't understand how players like Vardy work. Conclusion. Stats are here to stay in football, but that doesn't mean the conversation about them is over. When everybody has access to the data, the most important thing will be how you interpret it, and far too many people have simply replaced the table, goals and assists with one game XG, conversion rate and touches. In a complicated game like football, stats can never give you the total truth, any more than the eye test can, and simply throwing numbers around is no substitute for a thoughtful and reasoned argument. With more data available, it's not a matter of discarding old information for new, but learning to combine it all intelligently, and having a sense of what the numbers can really show you and what they can't. Here at FD, we'll continue to do our best to help make sense of the noise. So that's our take on the ways that stats are used and abused in football, but what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, drop us a like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell to never miss a video. We'll see you next time.